Please join me in welcoming Elise and Mike.
I heard a little brook babbling from its rocky source, babbling down to the valley, so bright, so wondrously clear. I know not what came over me, nor who prompted me, but I too had to go down with my wanderer's staff. Down and ever onwards, always following the brook, as it babbled ever brighter and ever clearer. Is this then my path? O brook, say where it leads. With your babbling you have quite befuddled my mind. And why do I speak of babbling? That is no babbling. It is the water nymphs singing as they dance their round far below. Let them sing, my friend. Let the brook babble on, and follow it cheerfully. Mill wheels turn in every clear brook. How has nature inspired musicians and composers in the past? How does nature continue to inspire the creative process now? And what is it like to be a musician in present-day rural America? These are the questions that were the genesis for our concert and conversation this morning. A musical journey from Vienna to Hungary to Armenia to a world premiere composed on Cobb Hill in Harrisville. As chamber musicians in residence at the Apple Hill Center for Chamber Music, located on 100 acres of beautiful woods and hills in nearby Nelson, New Hampshire, it's our great pleasure to explore some of these thoughts with you. Both Elise and I were also students at Apple Hill starting in the mid-'80s, so in addition to performing and rehearsing, we've been running, hiking, and swimming in this spectacular area for over 30 years.
The song you just heard, arranged for violin and viola by Mike, is entitled Wohin, from Franz Schubert's famous Die schöne Müllerin, or The Miller's Daughter, a song cycle based on poetry by the German lyric poet Wilhelm Müller. Wohin translates to where to. The poet uses the metaphor of a rushing brook in the woods to illustrate his questions of where life is leading him. The brook and forest end up bringing him to the miller's beautiful daughter. And spoiler alert, it does not end well. In the song, Schubert uses quick running 16th notes to imitate the water of the brook, moving and moving, rushing, searching, and leading relentlessly. This is an example of music imitating nature, and then using that imitation to make a larger metaphor about life. There are countless examples of this type of inspiration for composition, most often with the use of text.
But it's not always the idyllic natural scene that inspires. So Elise is going to play a sound from the animal world, and see if you can recognize it here. You may not. It's not one that you're grateful to hear always. I'll tell you what it is in a moment. Bela Bartok, one of the first known ethnomusicologists, traveled around Hungary in the early 20th century with a phonograph strapped to his back, recording the folk music of the rural Hungarian people. He used tunes from his research in most of his compositions throughout his life, including his 44 duos for 2 violins. We're improving it today by swapping out one of those violins for viola. And apparently he also encountered a mosquito or two during his travels through the countryside. So this is Vartox's Mosquito Dance. Is an example of music imitating nature with no further motive. The mosquito buzzes incessantly, then is either killed or bites its prey. The actual verdict is kind of unclear in that case. Bartok uses close musical intervals called half-steps or semitones. An instrumental drone. We put our mutes on, the little piece of rubber, to make it like you can barely hear it buzzing around. And then sul ponticello, which is the Italian word for close to the bridge. And it's kind of amazing, I think, that such an irritating and sometimes painful part of the natural world in the hands of an artist can become so engaging and interesting. Other examples of this type of inspiration for composition include the great 20th century French composer Oliver Messiaen, who incorporated actual bird songs, such as the cardinal, into his compositions, and Rimsky-Korsakov's Flight of the Bumblebee. That's another one that uses a ton of half steps in there.
Our next category is probably the most prolific. And that is music inspired by nature, by evoking the mood or character of a place in nature. There is no actual imitation, but the music describes or portrays nature vividly. Often these pieces demonstrate a strong love or emotion for a place. Common examples of this category are Strauss's Blue Danube Waltz, Copland's Appalachian Spring, and Groffet's Grand Canyon Suite. You can probably think of others. We will now perform Vache Sharafian's duo, Night Garden. Vache is a friend of Apple Hill's and lives in Yerevan, Armenia. He is also a resident composer for Yo-Yo Ma's Silk Road Ensemble. As we play, pay attention to what images might come to mind. What does your night garden look like? What is the weather like? Is it still, or is there a slight breeze? What plants, trees, and flowers might grow there? Is it dusk or after midnight? Are there scents or sounds? Are there people in the garden? as a piece like Appalachian Spring, perhaps purposely leaving room for the listener's imagination. But certainly, you feel the emotion and connection the composer feels for his night garden, wherever it might be. This reminds me of Robert McFarlane's book, Landmarks, in which he suggests that naming a thing in nature, or in this case, describing it with music, helps us notice it, and hopefully causes us to care about it and want to preserve it. After hearing the grandeur of the Grand Canyon Suite, and of course after seeing and experiencing it, you cannot bear to think of it vanishing.
Which leads us to a more current category, music written specifically to bear witness to the effects of climate change and hopefully use that awareness to effect change. In 2013, University of Minnesota undergrad and cellist Daniel Crawford used a process called data sonification to convert 133 years of global temperature records into music. He later created a composition that highlighted the rapidly changing climate on Earth, Planetary Band's Warming World for String Quartet. Each of the 4 instruments of the quartet is used to describe the pace and place of global warming based on temperature analysis from NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. The cello represents the temperature of the equatorial zone, the viola tracks the mid-latitudes, and the violins show the high latitudes and the Arctic. This past summer at Apple Hill, we performed the short piece in an impromptu concert one evening. It vividly drove home the point of rising temperatures as over the course of minutes, each musician struggles to play the highest notes possible on their instruments. Another example was composed by another friend of Apple Hill, New York City-based fiddler and composer Dana Lynn. She and her musical guitarist partner, Kyle Sano, wrote the Choral Suite, quote, bringing to life the fragile ecosystem of a coral reef using light boxes, projections, and the vocabulary of Irish melody to create an audiovisual poem in a vivid, impressionistic, and riveting performance. Elise and I attended the premiere in New York this past year, and Dana spoke aloud the names of all the underwater creatures featured, extinct, endangered, and still living. And hopefully this piece is scheduled to be performed on one of Apple Hill's Tuesday night concerts next summer in 2020.
From coral reefs to Mount Monadnock. The Monadnock region is home to many a thriving artist: writers, potters, painters, poets, photographers, composers, musicians, and more. We've all chosen to live and work in an area of the world that is one with nature, up close and personal with forests, lakes, and wildlife. One such musician is Harrisville composer and Keene State alumni, Miriam Sherrock. From Miriam's house in the woods, which offers a view of the mountain, the sounds of nature are prominent and ever-present. The hermit thrush is a major contributor to the summer soundscape. We commissioned Miriam to write a duo for today's event. This is what she writes about the piece, Hermit Thrush and Love. The hermit thrush is a common bird in the Monadnock region. You can hear it singing on summer days from the treetops. This piece begins with the hermit thrush whistling its tune. You will hear its mate join in the song. Hermit thrush are some of the few birds that sing in harmony. Unfortunately, all day cannot be spent singing, and so the birds begin their hunt. This is a dangerous task. They rustle the leaves to check for predators and peck for bugs and salamanders. One of the birds finishes her hunt successfully and makes it back to their home. However, her mate is not there. She waits anxiously and mournfully as she can hear the other birds struggle. Finally, all is silent. After a tense moment, her mate emerges triumphant. They return to the treetops to sing their duet, joyful and at peace once again. music that tells a story from nature, or programmatic music. Miriam documents in musical form an ecosystem we hope will be preserved forever. Another example of programmatic music is Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral. Beethoven, who lived in Vienna but spent most of his summers composing in the country, made his descriptive movement titles available to the public before the premiere. Beethoven was not alone in his retreat to the country for the purpose of creativity and composition. Gustav Mahler, Aaron Copland, who also spent time at the MacDowell colony in Peterborough, Claude Debussy, and Meredith Monk, among countless others, found inspiration and creativity while immersed in nature. Today, numerous artist retreat centers, such as MacDowell, exist worldwide to support this desire. This summer at Apple Hill, I made a point of asking people how the place of Apple Hill affected their experience. I would say the results were 50-50, with half saying that the natural world of Apple Hill was completely tied up in their feelings of heightened creativity. The beauty of the woods, the green, the stars, the gardens, the bird calls, the patience of the trees, the feel of the cooler night air. It was all intrinsic in their relationship with Apple Hill, chamber music, and a place to create. The other 50%, while loving the natural world of Nelson, New Hampshire, thought it was more that they were removed from their regular life. Their cell phone coverage and streaming Wi-Fi was spotty. No meetings to arrange, no parking to find. This is what gave them their boost of focus and creativity. I have a feeling it is a combination of the two, especially for those of us who live here year-round, who certainly have regular meetings and busy schedules. For me, it is often a step outside into nature, and it literally takes one step in Harrisville and Nelson to find sanity, breath, and inspiration.
Finally, we wanted to express our appreciation to the Conservancy for choosing to invite musicians to speak and play at your event. Science is so important to the study, preservation. So to make one last connection, we thought it would be nice to talk for a moment about that paragon of nature appreciation in the region, Henry David Thoreau. You probably know Thoreau as a naturalist, one of the first ecologists, and the writer of Walden and Civil Disobedience, but he came from a musical family. His mother taught piano in Concord. He played the flute, and he was well versed in both the classical and popular music of his day. In addition to the natural world, Thoreau wrote a tremendous amount about music and sound, how music can be an expression of the environment, and how the environment has an inherent musical soundscape. A brief quote as an example. "A thrumming of piano strings beyond the gardens and through the elms. At length the melody steals into my being. I know not when it began to occupy me. By some fortunate coincidence or thought or circumstance, I am attuned to the universe. My being moves in a sphere of melody. My fancy and imagination are excited to an inconceivable degree. This is no longer the dull earth on which I stood. The music of all creatures has to do with their loves, even toads and frogs. Is it not the same with man?" In both music and observation of nature, Thoreau saw a means to experience a larger world, an interconnected world, outside of our individual selves, and that was a wonderful, awe-inspiring thing. And the cultivation of both have the same requirements: a quiet and focused, open and curious attention. So we'll close with a little tribute to Henry David Thoreau, his most favorite popular tune, written by Thomas Moore, a songwriter, about boating on a lake in Canada. You can even imagine Thoreau's soundscape on a night in Sudbury in late summer as we're playing it. And we'll close with a quote from Charles Ives, probably the most famous American composer of Thoreau's time, who said, "Thoreau was a great musician, not because he played the flute, but because he did not have to go to Boston to hear the symphony."